The price of success. The towering skyline of New York glowed under the early morning sun, its glass facades reflecting the golden hues of dawn. From the 50th floor of Blackwood Enterprises, Ryan Blackwood stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, surveying the city he had conquered. His empire stretched across finance, real estate, and technology. A kingdom built on precision, strategy, and relentless ambition. At 35, he had everything he had ever wanted: power, wealth, and an unshakable reputation. He was the kind of man who didn't ask for permission. He took what he wanted. But beneath the layers of expensive suits and ruthless efficiency was something else. A silence, a void he refused to acknowledge. His assistant, Eleanor, knocked once before stepping into his office. She was efficient as always, holding a sleek tablet filled with today's market reports and board meeting agendas. Your 9 a.m. with the Tokyo investors is confirmed. Legal is still handling the European merger, and the press is pushing for a statement about your upcoming keynote speech. Ryan nodded absent-mindedly, his attention fixed on the single-framed photograph on his desk, face down, as it had been for years. Eleanor followed his gaze and hesitated for a split second. You have an interview with Forbes at noon. They want a personal angle, how you built an empire from scratch. Ryan exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Tell them I don't do personal. She smirked slightly. So I've told them every single time. Doesn't stop them from asking. His phone buzzed, and he turned back to his tablet, scrolling through unread emails. Business as usual. Another day, another deal. Then, something unexpected. A notification. A name he hadn't seen in years. Olivia Bennett. His thumb hovered over the screen as a single image loaded. His chest tightened as if an invisible fist had wrapped around his ribs. There she was. Her auburn hair was longer now, cascading in soft waves past her shoulders. She was smiling, truly smiling, standing in a park surrounded by 5 children. Ryan's stomach dropped. 5. He swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. No, that wasn't possible. His hands trembled slightly as he zoomed in. 5 identical faces, bright eyes, wide grins, each one reflecting unmistakable features, features that mirrored his own. Quintuplets. His throat went dry. He had walked away 5 years ago, believing he had left behind 1 unborn child. Maybe 2, but 5. The caption beneath the picture hit him like a freight train. 5 years of pure love with my little miracles. The room around him blurred. The sound of Eleanor speaking faded into the background. The weight of his choices, the arrogance of his past decisions, suddenly bore down on him with crushing intensity. He had spent years chasing boardroom victories, mergers, and takeovers. He had convinced himself that the past belonged to the past, that Olivia had moved on. But now, he wasn't so sure. Because looking at that picture, at those 5 innocent faces, something inside him shattered. And for the first time in his life, Ryan Blackwood was afraid. 5 years earlier. The night was heavy with rain, the city streets slick and gleaming under the dim glow of streetlights. Ryan stood in the doorway of their apartment, his suit still crisp despite the late hour. Olivia stood before him, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she clutched a single ultrasound photo to her chest. You're really doing this? Her voice broke. Ryan clenched his jaw, his insides twisting in ways he refused to acknowledge. You know what my life is, Olivia. You knew from the beginning. Her breath hitched. Your life. Ryan, this isn't just about you anymore. She thrust the ultrasound photo toward him. We're having a baby. He closed his eyes briefly, forcing down the turmoil inside him. I'm not ready for this. Her lip quivered, but she refused to cry. Not ready? You think I'm ready to do this alone? He turned away, his heart hammering. I can't be the man you need me to be. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then what are you doing here? Silence. He had no answer. A final moment stretched between them. One last chance to change his mind. To stay, to fight for something more than boardrooms and bank accounts. Then he walked out, and he never looked back. Present day. The city pulsed around him as Ryan drove through the streets, his grip tight on the steering wheel. He hadn't planned on going to see her, not yet, but his feet had carried him there instinctively, driven by something primal, something undeniable. The brownstone apartment they once shared loomed before him. He hadn't been here in 5 years, yet it still felt like a ghost of his past lingering in the air. He hesitated. What the hell was he doing here? A million excuses ran through his mind. He had built an empire in the time they had been apart. He had become more powerful than he ever imagined. He had told himself he didn't regret leaving. But now he wasn't so sure. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. His world had already been shaken once today. Nothing else could compare. Then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of humor, the front door of the brownstone creaked open. And there she was. Olivia stood frozen in the doorway, her lips parting slightly in shock. Her eyes, those same piercing green eyes, locked onto his, a storm of emotions flickering behind them. And for the first time in 5 years, Ryan Blackwood felt completely, utterly powerless. Ghosts of the past. The streets of New York buzzed with life, but for Ryan Blackwood, everything had fallen into eerie silence. The towering buildings, the honking cabs, the distant chatter of pedestrians, all of it faded into nothingness as he stood face to face with the one person he had spent years convincing himself he had forgotten. Olivia. She hadn't changed much in 5 years, but at the same time, she was completely different. Her hair was still the rich auburn he remembered, but longer now, curling slightly at the ends. She still had that quiet strength in her stance, the way she squared her shoulders even when caught off guard. But her eyes, those piercing green eyes, held something new. Not love, not longing, but steel. You shouldn't be here. Her voice was firm, but he caught the slight tremor beneath it. Ryan took a slow, measured breath. He hadn't planned this. He had driven through the city, trying to process what he had seen. 5 children, his children, and somehow his instincts had carried him straight to her doorstep. I know, he admitted, his voice lower than he intended, but I had to see you. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head as she stepped forward, closing the door behind her. The old brownstone stood behind her like a fortress, one he was no longer welcome inside. You had 5 years to see me, Ryan, she said, crossing her arms. You don't just get to show up now because you saw a picture on social media. His jaw tightened. I didn't know. Her lips pressed together, her fingers clenching into fists at her sides. No, you didn't want to know. Ryan exhaled sharply. She was right. He had walked away without looking back, assuming Olivia had moved on, assuming whatever life she built had nothing to do with him. But she hadn't just moved on. She had built a family. His family. I thought. He hesitated, the words thick in his throat. I thought it was just 1 child. Maybe 2. Her eyes flashed with something dangerous. Oh, so 3 would have been your limit. 4 too many. His chest tightened. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Ryan? Her voice was sharp now, edged with 5 years of pain and betrayal. Because from where I'm standing, you walked out on 6 people that day. And you haven't earned the right to walk back in just because you're curious. Ryan swallowed hard. The weight of his choices, his arrogance, his selfishness, it all came crashing down on him at once. He had been so sure of himself, so sure that he had made the right decision back then. Now he wasn't sure of anything. He dragged a hand down his face, inhaling deeply. He shook his head. I just want to understand. Olivia's laugh was humorless. Understand what, Ryan? How I spent months trying to figure out how to raise 5 babies alone. How I worked 2 jobs, ran on 3 hours of sleep, and still did everything I could to make sure they never felt like they were missing anything. His stomach twisted painfully. Olivia, You left, she interrupted, her voice breaking slightly before she forced herself back into control. And I hated you for it. But I made peace with it. I had to. Because I had 5 tiny little humans depending on me. Ryan's throat tightened. He had spent years convincing himself that Olivia had moved on, that she was fine. But looking at her now, he realized that she had never been fine. She had just been strong. Too strong to let herself break. Do they? He swallowed, barely able to ask the question. Do they know? She exhaled slowly, her gaze flickering toward the window. No, she admitted. They don't know about you. Not really. The words hit him like a sucker punch. His own children had no idea he existed. He felt his hands curl into fists, a wave of nausea rolling through him. What had he done? They think I was always meant to be their only parent, Olivia continued, her voice softer now, almost tired. And I kept it that way for a reason. I didn't want them to wonder why their father didn't love them enough to stay. Ryan flinched, the words slicing through him like a blade. It wasn't about love. Wasn't it? Olivia countered. Because I spent 5 years believing otherwise. Silence fell between them, thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Finally, Olivia sighed, rubbing her temples as if she were exhausted just by his presence. Go home, Ryan. He should have. He should have walked away. But he couldn't. Let me see them. The words left his mouth before he even realized he had said them. Olivia's eyes snapped to his, a flicker of shock crossing her face before it hardened again. No. His chest ached. Olivia. I said no, Ryan. Her voice was cold now, final. You don't get to waltz back in and demand to see them. That's not how this works. Ryan clenched his jaw. He had walked away from them once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. I'm not asking for full custody, he said, forcing himself to keep his voice even. I need to meet them. Talk to them. She shook her head. Absolutely not. Frustration burned in his veins. They're my kids too. That did it. Olivia's entire body tensed, her hands trembling as she took a slow step forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. No, Ryan. They stopped being yours the day you left. Her words knocked the wind out of him. And the worst part, she was right. Ryan exhaled slowly, trying to regain control over the storm raging inside him. I just want to be in their lives, Olivia. She looked away, her jaw tight. And if I say no, his hands curled into fists, then I'll fight for them. She let out a slow breath, shaking her head. You really haven't changed, have you? Ryan stayed silent. He didn't know how to answer that. For a long moment, Olivia just stared at him, as if debating something in her mind. Then, finally, she sighed, crossing her arms again. One meeting, she said, her voice clipped. One. That's it. Relief surged through Ryan so fast it made him dizzy. Thank you, he murmured. Don't thank me yet, Olivia said flatly. Because if you so much as hint at hurting them, if you even think about walking away again, I will never, ever let you near them again. And I mean that, Ryan. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Understood. She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of hesitation. When she found none, she sighed, and turned back toward the brownstone. Tomorrow. Central Park. Noon. Then, without another word, she stepped inside and closed the door. Ryan stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, his heart hammering in his chest. He had a chance, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't going to waste it. Meeting the 5. The weight of the past settled heavily on Ryan's shoulders as he sat in his car, parked along the curb near Central Park. He had spent the entire night unable to sleep, his mind consumed by a million thoughts, all circling the same unavoidable truth. This was the most important meeting of his life. Boardrooms and billion-dollar deals had never made him nervous, but now, the prospect of standing before 5 tiny humans, his children, made his pulse hammer like he was walking into enemy territory unarmed. He had spent the last 5 years convinced that Olivia had moved on, that she had built a life where he had no place. But now he knew better. She hadn't moved on. She had survived. And she had done it without him. The time for regret was over. It was time to face what he had left behind. The park, the moment of truth. Central Park was alive with movement, the usual blend of joggers, dog walkers, and tourists weaving between the benches and trees. Ryan scanned the area, searching for the familiar face that had haunted him since yesterday. Then he saw her. Olivia stood near a grassy clearing, arms crossed over her chest, her eyes sharp as she spoke quietly to 5 small figures huddled beside her. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. They were even smaller in person than they had looked in the picture. 5. It still didn't seem real. As if sensing his presence, Olivia turned, her gaze locking onto his immediately. Her expression was unreadable, but the warning in her posture was clear. Don't mess this up. Ryan forced himself to move, stepping onto the grass, his heartbeat pounding against his ribs. The children turned. 5 pairs of eyes blinked up at him, their faces a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Ryan had no idea what to say. Kids, Olivia finally broke the silence, her voice carefully neutral. This is Ryan. He wanted to meet you. The tallest of the 5, a boy with sharp blue eyes that mirrored Ryan's, tilted his head. Are you the guy from the picture? He asked bluntly. Ryan hesitated. What picture? The boy shrugged. The one Mom was mad about last night. Olivia stiffened. James. What? James shrugged. You were mad. Ryan almost smiled at the defiance in his tone. He recognized himself in it. Another child, a girl with dark curls and Olivia's green eyes, stepped forward, her gaze sharp with quiet intelligence. Are you our dad? Ryan's breath hitched. He glanced at Olivia, unsure of what she had told them. She looked away. It was now or never. I am, Ryan said carefully. Silence. Then one of the younger boys, smaller than the rest, let out a long, drawn-out, "Ha." Ryan frowned. "Ha." The boy pointed at him. You don't look like a dad. Ryan glanced down at himself. His designer suit and polished shoes were a far cry from the casual attire of parents playing with their kids in the park. Olivia smirked slightly. Told you. Ryan exhaled, taking off his jacket and rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. Better. The small boy considered it. A little. Ryan crouched down, leveling himself with them. Look, I know this is weird. And I know I wasn't here before. But I want to be here now. The girl with the curls narrowed her eyes. Why now? He hesitated. Because I made a mistake, and I want to fix it. James, the oldest, crossed his arms. Mom says you left. Ryan met his gaze, his stomach twisting. She's right. Why? Ryan took a deep breath. Because I was scared. I thought I wasn't ready to be a dad. And I thought I had to choose between my job and my family. But I was wrong. More silence. Then the smallest boy, the one who had critiqued his dad look, walked right up to him. You have the same nose as me, he announced, pointing at Ryan's face. Ryan let out a small, startled chuckle. I do. The boy nodded. And your ears stick out like mine. Olivia pressed her lips together, clearly trying not to laugh. Ryan grinned, an unfamiliar warmth spreading in his chest. Well, that's good to know. James, still skeptical, studied him for a long moment before finally asking, Are you staying? Ryan's throat tightened. 5 years ago, he had walked away. He had been so sure that success was the only thing that mattered. Now he realized this was what mattered. He met James's gaze, steady and unflinching. Yes, I'm staying. The test. Over the next hour, Ryan did something he had never done before. He listened. He let the kids talk, answer his questions, and ask their own. And boy, Did they have a lot of them? Are you rich? Where do you live? Do you have a dog? Can you do a backflip? Mom says you're stubborn. Are you? Ryan had never been so out of his element in his life. He was used to hard negotiations, high-pressure deals. But this was an entirely different battlefield. Okay, James finally said, rubbing his chin. You can stay. For now. Ryan blinked. Ah, thanks. But you have to pass a test, James added. Ryan hesitated. What kind of test? The kids huddled together, whispering frantically. Olivia sighed and shook her head. Finally, they turned back to him. You have to play with us, the little boy with the dad critique announced. Ryan raised a brow. Play? James smirked. Tag. Ryan frowned. Like, run-around tag. Obviously, Olivia muttered, arms crossed. Ryan glanced down at his polished dress shoes, then at the 5 little faces staring at him expectantly. He exhaled, then rolled up his sleeves higher. Fine. The kids grinned mischievously. You're it. Then, without warning, they took off. Ryan cursed under his breath and took off after them. The first time he stumbled in his expensive shoes, Olivia laughed so hard she had to sit down. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Ryan Blackwood felt like he was exactly where he belonged. A father's trial. The crisp autumn air filled Central Park as Ryan Blackwood ran harder than he had in years. His expensive dress shoes slipped slightly on the grass, his breaths coming in short bursts as 5 tiny figures darted in all directions. He had built an empire with sheer determination and ruthless precision. He had negotiated deals worth billions, outmaneuvered the most cunning executives on Wall Street, and expanded his influence across continents. Yet here he was, struggling to catch a bunch of 5-year-olds in a game of tag. His lungs burned as he lunged for James, the oldest of the quintuplets, who twisted at the last second and effortlessly dodged him. Too slow, James taunted, laughing as he sprinted away. Ryan groaned, doubling over for a moment. Are they all this fast? He muttered under his breath. Beside him, Olivia smirked. She was seated on a park bench, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold with evident amusement. You said you wanted to be in their lives, she teased. You didn't think it would be easy, did you? Ryan shot her a look, but had no time to respond as a small body collided with his leg. He stumbled back slightly and looked down to see one of the boys. Ryan still had trouble remembering their names, giggling up at him. I gotcha, the boy announced proudly, grabbing onto Ryan's knee. Ryan narrowed his eyes. Wait a minute. You're it. The boy blinked. Then his little face twisted in horror. Oh. He turned and ran for his life. Ryan couldn't help but laugh. It was strange. He had spent so long living in a world where everything was measured in profit and loss, where time was money and emotions were distractions. But here, with 5 tiny humans shrieking with laughter around him, he felt something different. Something real. The hard conversations. After an hour of running, tripping, and being tackled repeatedly by his own children, Ryan finally collapsed onto the grass. I surrender, he declared dramatically, lying flat on his back. You win. The kids cheered in victory, piling on top of him in a dog pile. Ryan groaned under the combined weight of 5 small bodies, but he couldn't stop the genuine smile that spread across his face. Then, out of nowhere, James's voice turned serious. Are you really gonna stay? Ryan felt the weight of the question settle over him like a cold shadow. The laughter stopped. The other 4 kids lifted their heads, their wide, curious eyes all fixed on him. Even Olivia, who had been pretending to look at her phone, glanced up. Ryan swallowed hard. He had never been good at emotions. But if there was ever a time to be honest, it was now. He sat up slowly, brushing off grass from his sleeves. Yes, he said firmly. I'm staying. James frowned. What if you change your mind? Ryan inhaled deeply, his throat tight. I won't. Lucy, the curly-haired girl, tilted her head. But you left before. Ryan exhaled. I know. And I was wrong. Silence. Then the smallest of the boys, Ben, Ryan finally remembered, crawled into his lap. Promise? Ben asked, looking up at him. Ryan felt something in his chest crack. 5 years ago, he had walked away from them. He had let fear dictate his choices. He had convinced himself that they were better off without him. But looking at them now, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going anywhere. I promise, Ryan said softly. Ben beamed, wrapping his tiny arms around Ryan's waist. Ryan froze for a moment, completely caught off guard by the sudden hug. Then, without thinking, he wrapped his arms around his son. And for the first time, he felt like a father. The shadow of the past. The day had been good. Better than Ryan had ever expected. He had learned their names. James, the leader. Lucy, the cautious one. Ben, the tiny troublemaker. Caleb, the quiet observer. And Grace, the sweetheart. And they had learned about him. At least, they had learned a version of him. The version that played tag and let them climb all over him. The version that promised to stay. The version that was desperately trying to be something more than the man who had left. But Olivia, she wasn't convinced. As the sun dipped below the skyline, she walked beside him on their way back to the parking lot, her expression unreadable. The kids were ahead of them, skipping and laughing, completely oblivious to the tension in the air. You did okay today, Olivia admitted. Ryan glanced at her. That sounds dangerously close to a compliment. She smirked slightly. Don't get ahead of yourself. Then her face hardened. But one good afternoon doesn't make up for 5 years. Ryan exhaled, nodding. I know. Olivia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. They're happy, Ryan. I made sure of that. They don't know what it's like to feel abandoned or unwanted, and I will not let you change that. His chest ached. She didn't say it, but he knew what she meant. If you leave again, you'll destroy them. Ryan clenched his jaw. I won't hurt them, Olivia. She studied him, searching for any sign of weakness, any indication that he was still the man who had walked away 5 years ago. Finally, she sighed. I guess we'll see. She turned and walked toward the car. Ryan stayed behind for a moment, watching her. She didn't trust him, and he didn't blame her. But he wasn't here to ask for trust. He was here to earn it, one step at a time. The way to fatherhood. Ryan stood frozen in place, watching as Olivia walked away toward the car. His mind was still processing her words, the silent warning she had given him. One good afternoon doesn't make up for 5 years. She was right. It didn't. But he wanted, needed, to prove that this wasn't just some passing whim, some temporary guilt-driven attempt at redemption. This was real. This was his family. He took a deep breath and started walking again, catching up just as Olivia opened the backseat door to help Lucy buckle in. The other 4 kids were already inside, talking and laughing as if today had been nothing more than a fun trip to the park. For them, maybe it was. For Ryan, it was everything. Want me to help? He asked hesitantly, watching as Olivia pulled the seatbelt over Lucy's small shoulders. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I've got it. He nodded, stepping back. She was still in control, still the only parent they had ever known. When she finally closed the door and turned to face him, the exhaustion in her eyes was unmistakable. Ryan hesitated. He wanted to say something, anything, but before he could, Olivia sighed. They like you, she admitted, crossing her arms. The words sent an unexpected wave of warmth through his chest. But that doesn't mean I do. And just like that, the warmth vanished. Ryan clenched his jaw. I get it. You don't trust me. Olivia let out a small bitter laugh. Trust. Ryan, you left me standing in a doorway with an ultrasound picture and a broken heart. trust isn't even in the same universe as where we are right now." Her words cut deeper than he expected. But he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he owned it. "You're right," he said quietly. "And I hate that I did that to you." She blinked, as if she hadn't expected that response. Ryan exhaled. "I don't expect you to believe me when I say I want to be in their lives. But I'm not going to stop proving it." Olivia studied him for a long moment, her lips pressed together. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed and rubbed her temples. "Fine." Ryan's eyebrows shot up. "Fine." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't get too excited. I'm not rolling out the red carpet. You get small steps, Ryan. You want to see them. Then prove it. But if you screw this up, if you hurt them in any way, I swear I will never let you near them again." Ryan swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "I won't screw this up." Olivia didn't reply. She just stared at him for another long moment before turning and sliding into the driver's seat. The car door closed, and just like that, she was gone. Ryan stood there long after the car disappeared down the road. And for the first time in 5 years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. The next step. The next week was slow. Painfully slow. Olivia had agreed to let him see the kids, but she wasn't making it easy. She kept him at a distance, forcing him to prove that he wasn't just going to disappear again. She dictated the rules. No unannounced visits. No overnight stays. No gifts or bribery. And absolutely no big promises. It was frustrating, but Ryan knew she was testing him. And for once in his life, he wasn't trying to win a game. He was trying to win back his family. A day in their world. "Okay, Blackwood," Olivia muttered as they stood in front of a small, colorful building in Brooklyn. "Let's see if you can survive a day in the trenches." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Trenches." Olivia gestured to the building behind them. "A daycare center." Ryan blinked. "Wait, I thought we were going somewhere fun." She smirked. "Oh, it's fun. For them. For you? Not so much." Before he could ask what she meant, 5 children came barreling toward them at full speed. "Daddy's here." Ben squealed, throwing himself into Ryan's legs. Ryan almost fell backward from the force. He still wasn't used to being called that. He glanced at Olivia, who rolled her eyes. "Don't look at me. I didn't tell them to call you that." Lucy, her hands on her hips, nodded seriously. "We decided it as a group." James crossed his arms. "Yeah, but it's still temporary. We're testing you." Ryan smirked. "Testing me, huh?" Caleb, the quietest of the 5, nodded solemnly. "You must complete the mission first." Ryan crouched down to their level. "What kind of mission?" James grinned mischievously. "You have to survive a full day with us without Mom helping you." Ryan turned to Olivia, eyes wide. "You can't be serious." Olivia smiled sweetly. "Oh, I am. Good luck, Blackwood." Then, before he could protest, she walked away. Ryan stared after her, then looked back down at the 5 tiny judges waiting for him to prove himself. "Okay," he muttered. "How hard can this be?" Chaos ensues. Ryan quickly learned 3 very important things. 5-year-olds have infinite energy. They have no concept of personal space. They are small, but they are terrifying. First, they dragged him into craft time, where Ben somehow glued his hands together. Then, during snack time, Caleb demanded a highly specific cut on his sandwich, which Ryan failed miserably at executing. By nap time, Ryan had lost track of 2 of them, only to find Lucy and James trying to build a fort out of the daycare chairs. By the end of the day, he had glitter on his face, juice spilled on his shirt, and Play-Doh stuck to his watch. He had survived Wall Street. But this was the real challenge. The unexpected moment. When Olivia arrived to pick them up, she took one look at him and burst out laughing. Ryan scowled. "I don't see what's so funny. You look like you fought a battle and lost." Ryan exhaled, glancing down at his wrinkled, juice-stained shirt. I might have. The kids, however, looked completely unbothered. Can we do it again tomorrow? Ben asked eagerly. Ryan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, buddy, we can. The kids cheered, and when Olivia looked at him again, there was something different in her gaze. A little less anger, a little less doubt. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to prove himself. One day at a time. The breaking point. The hardest thing he'd ever done. Ryan Blackwood had built an empire. He had gone toe-to-toe with some of the world's most cutthroat businessmen, had negotiated billion-dollar deals with nothing but a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind. He had spent his life being in control. But there was no controlling fatherhood. It had been 3 weeks since Olivia had let him into their world, and every single day felt like a new kind of battle. Waking up at 6 in the morning. Brutal. Keeping up with 5 energetic kids. Impossible. Convincing them he wasn't going to disappear again. That one hurt the most. He had been tested in every way imaginable. Snack time negotiations, disaster-level art projects, and even an all-out war over who got to sit next to him at dinner. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. A night of firsts. It was a Friday evening when Olivia finally, reluctantly, agreed to let Ryan watch the kids alone. No safety net. No backup. Just him. I'll only be gone for 3 hours, she said, standing in the doorway of her brownstone. Arms crossed. Think you can handle it? Ryan smirked, adjusting his sleeves. Olivia, I run a multi-million-dollar corporation. I think I can handle 5 kids for a few hours. She raised an eyebrow. You sure? Because last time, you almost had a meltdown over a peanut butter sandwich request. Ryan scowled. That was Caleb. He wanted the crusts off but also on, which makes no sense. Olivia snorted. Welcome to parenthood. Before Ryan could fire back, she grabbed her purse. All right, I'll be back by 10. Try not to burn my house down. Ryan watched her leave, an unsettling feeling creeping into his chest. He had spent the past 3 weeks earning her trust, earning their trust. Tonight was a test, and he couldn't afford to fail. A disaster in the making. It started off smoothly enough. Ryan had successfully fed them. Chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. Easy win. He had survived story time, barely, after Grace insisted he do all the voices. And he had even broken up a fight between James and Ben, which ended in a ridiculous pinky promise truce. For a brief, shining moment, he thought, I've got this. Then, chaos struck. First, Caleb spilled juice all over Ryan's phone. Then Lucy cut her own bangs with safety scissors and insisted she looked amazing. And finally, the moment that almost killed him, Ben started crying. Not a normal cry. A deep, shaking, gasping sob that made Ryan's entire body go cold. Ryan rushed to him, heart pounding. Hey, what's wrong, buddy? He knelt beside the little boy, gently wiping his tears. Ben sniffled, rubbing at his eyes. Are you gonna leave again? Ryan felt like the air had been knocked out of him. His entire body went stiff. What? Ben hiccuped, his small fingers twisting into Ryan's shirt. You left before. What if you leave again? Ryan's throat burned. He had worked so hard to prove himself, to show them he was staying. But it wasn't enough, because he had already abandoned them once. Ryan exhaled sharply and pulled Ben onto his lap, holding him tightly. I'm not going anywhere, he whispered. I promise. Ben buried his face in Ryan's chest. For the first time in his life, Ryan understood something terrifying. Love wasn't just about showing up. It was about proving, every single day, that you weren't going to leave. And for the first time, he was willing to do whatever it took to prove that to them. Olivia's doubts. By the time Olivia returned, the house was still standing, though barely. She stepped inside, immediately noticing the mess. Crumbs on the floor, blankets tossed over the couch, a few stray juice boxes on the table. But the real shock came when she found Ryan. He was sitting on the couch, fast asleep, with Ben curled up against his chest, clutching his shirt like a lifeline. Olivia's heart twisted. She had spent 5 years building walls, keeping Ryan at arm's length, refusing to believe that he could ever be the kind of man she once thought he was. But now she wasn't so sure. She walked over, hesitating for just a moment before gently shaking his shoulder. Ryan's eyes blinked open, groggy and unfocused. For a second, he looked so different. Not the cold businessman, not the man who had walked away 5 years ago. Just Ryan. Just a father trying to figure it all out. "They were good," he murmured, voice raspy with exhaustion. Olivia swallowed hard. She didn't know what scared her more, the fact that he had changed, or the fact that she was starting to believe it. A hard conversation. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, Olivia leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Ryan as he rubbed a hand over his face. "You look dead," she noted. He huffed out a tired laugh. "I feel dead." Silence stretched between them. Then Olivia exhaled. Ben was crying earlier, wasn't he? Ryan stilled. He hadn't told her that. "Yeah," he admitted after a beat. "What did he say?" Ryan hesitated. He could lie. Say it was nothing. Make it easier. But he was done lying. He asked if I was going to leave again. Olivia closed her eyes, pain flashing across her face. Ryan exhaled, his voice softer. "I told him no. And I meant it." Olivia studied him for a long time. Searching, waiting, testing. And for the first time, she didn't look completely convinced. But she didn't look completely unconvinced either. "Good," she finally said. "Because I meant what I said, Ryan. If you leave again, I will never let you near them again." Ryan nodded. "I know." A long silence. Then Olivia turned away, heading toward the hallway. Ryan watched her go, his chest aching with something he didn't quite know how to name. He had come here to be a father. But for the first time in 5 years, he realized he wasn't just fighting for them. He was fighting for her too. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had already lost. The choice that changes everything. The unspoken truth. For weeks, Ryan had been fighting to prove himself, not to his board, not to his investors, not to the world, but to 5 little humans who didn't know if they could trust him, and to one woman who wasn't ready to believe in him again. And honestly, he couldn't blame them. He had spent 5 years chasing success, control, power. He had spent 5 years convincing himself that he had made the right decision. But he had been so wrong. And now he was running out of time to make it right. The unexpected invitation. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Ryan had just wrapped up a conference call when his phone vibrated on his desk. "Olivia." His heartbeat picked up as he answered. "Olivia." A long pause. Then, "Are you free this weekend?" Ryan froze. She had never asked him that before. "Yeah," he said cautiously. "Why?" Another pause. Then, "There's a family event. The kids, they want you to come." Ryan inhaled sharply. He wasn't expecting that. His grip tightened on the phone. "Are you sure?" He heard Olivia sigh on the other end. "No, but they are." Ryan closed his eyes, a slow breath escaping his lips. They'd wanted him there. For the first time, it wasn't just about him showing up. They were asking for him. "I'll be there," he said softly. "Good," Olivia said quickly, almost like she was regretting calling. "It starts at noon. Don't be late." Then she hung up. Ryan sat there for a long moment, staring at his phone, his chest tight. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. And for the first time, he was terrified. The family event. The event was held at Olivia's parents' house. It was the first time Ryan had been invited anywhere near Olivia's family since he had walked out 5 years ago. And judging by the cold stares he got the second he stepped onto the front lawn, he wasn't exactly welcome. "You're actually here." Ryan turned and found Margaret Bennett, Olivia's mother, standing on the porch, arms crossed. She hadn't changed much, same sharp gaze, same no-nonsense attitude. "Mrs. Bennett," Ryan said carefully, "it's good to see you." She raised an eyebrow. "That makes one of us." Ryan exhaled, bracing himself. "I know I don't deserve to be here." "You don't." He clenched his jaw, but nodded. "I'm here for the kids." Margaret studied him for a long moment. Then, to his shock, she sighed. "They adore you, you know," she said quietly. Ryan's stomach twisted. "I don't deserve that either." "No, you don't," she agreed. "But they don't know that. And I won't let you hurt them, Ryan." His jaw tightened. "I won't." She stared at him for a beat longer, then finally stepped aside. "Then go find them." Ryan didn't hesitate. He walked inside. A moment that changed everything. The house was warm and chaotic, filled with voices and laughter. Ryan scanned the room until he spotted them. 5 little faces lit up the moment they saw him. "Daddy's here." The word still hit him like a punch to the chest. Lucy ran straight for him, her small hands grabbing onto his coat. "You're late." Ryan crouched down, smiling. "By 5 minutes." "Still late," James muttered. Ryan chuckled. "I'll do better next time." James huffed. "You better." Ryan looked up just in time to see Olivia watching him from across the room. She didn't say anything. She just watched. And for some reason, that felt more important than anything else. The breaking point. The event went surprisingly well. Ryan played games with the kids, listened to their endless stories, and even managed to survive a very awkward dinner conversation with Olivia's father. For a moment, he let himself believe that this was real. That maybe, just maybe, he had a place here. But then, it all fell apart. It was late, and Ryan was in the kitchen helping clean up when he overheard voices in the next room. Olivia and Margaret. "You're letting him in too easily," Margaret said, voice sharp. "Mom, he's trying. And what happens when he decides he's not ready again?" Ryan's heart stopped. Silence. Then, Olivia's voice, quiet and broken. "I don't know." Ryan closed his eyes, pain ripping through him. She still didn't believe he would stay. And the worst part, he wasn't sure if he had done enough to prove her wrong. The final choice. Later that night, when the event was over and the kids were asleep, Ryan found Olivia outside on the back porch. She didn't look at him as he stepped beside her. "You heard, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Ryan swallowed. "Yeah." Silence. Then finally, Olivia turned to him. "Ryan," she said, her voice tired, "I need to know something." He met her gaze, heart pounding. "Anything." She exhaled. "If I tell you that this is too much, that I can't trust you yet, will you leave?" Ryan stilled. That was it. The moment. The test. He had spent his entire life choosing the easy way out, choosing success over emotions, choosing himself over everything else. But looking at Olivia now, he knew, if he walked away again, he would lose her forever. And this time, he wasn't walking away. "No," he said softly. Her breath hitched. "I'm not going anywhere, Olivia." She closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. "You say that now," she whispered. Ryan stepped closer. "I'll say it every day if I have to," he murmured, "until you believe me." She looked up at him, searching his face, looking for any sign of a lie. She didn't find one. For the first time, she looked at him like maybe, just maybe, she could believe in him again. And for Ryan, that was enough. For now, the beginning of something real. When Ryan left that night, it wasn't with a promise of forgiveness. It wasn't with a guarantee that Olivia would ever let him back into her heart. But it was with something more important. A chance to prove that this time, he wasn't leaving. Not for success, not for fear, not for anything. Because for the first time in his life, Ryan Blackwood had finally figured out what really mattered. And he wasn't letting it go. Not again.